I had my way about it, they'd all be sent back to Russia or some other unpleasant place.
Hollywood's golden age was filled with dazzling stars, breathtaking romances, and films that defined generations. Among those legends stood Clark Gable, forever remembered as the suave and confident king of Hollywood, and Robert Taylor, admired for his stoic presence and classic leading man charm. Both men were icons, adored by millions and respected in the industry. Yet, behind the camera, not everything was as glamorous as it seemed. One story from that era has continued to haunt Hollywood lore, a story of betrayal, disillusionment, and anger. It revolves around a shocking moment when Robert Taylor, usually calm and diplomatic, lashed out at Clark Gable, calling him a coward. For a man like Taylor, who rarely let his temper slip, the accusation stunned everyone who heard it. How could one Hollywood leading man, admired for his quiet dignity, so fiercely condemn the man audiences saw as a fearless hero both on and off screen? The truth lies in a single incident, an incident that revealed cracks in Gable's polished persona and tested the loyalty and brotherhood among Hollywood's elite. It was a confrontation that pulled back the curtain on the glamorous illusions of the golden age, exposing the human flaws that even the brightest stars couldn't hide. This wasn't a matter of professional rivalry alone. It was deeply personal, tied to questions of courage, morality, and integrity. Today, we revisit this forgotten moment that turned admiration into bitterness, reshaping the friendship of two of Hollywood's most beloved figures. To understand why Robert Taylor's outburst was so shocking, we must first recognize who these two men were at the height of their fame. Clark Gable, often called the King of Hollywood, dominated screens throughout the 1930s and 1940s. With his effortless charm, rugged masculinity, and iconic performances, most famously as Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind, he embodied the very definition of a leading man. Audiences adored him for his confidence, his devil-may-care grin, and his ability to turn even flawed characters into heroes. Off-screen, Gable's life was equally captivating. His marriage to Carole Lombard became one of Hollywood's most beloved romances, adding to his image as a man of passion and loyalty. Robert Taylor, meanwhile, carved a different path. Known as the man with the perfect profile, he was less flamboyant than Gable, but no less admired. Taylor's roles in films like Camille and Waterloo Bridge displayed quiet strength, subtle emotion, and a depth that won him respect among critics and audiences alike. While Gable exuded a fiery charisma, Taylor embodied steadiness and restraint, a man who could convey immense feeling without raising his voice. Both actors shared not only fame, but also reputations for being consummate professionals. They were admired not just for their looks and talent, but also for their reliability and dedication to the craft. While Gable was often viewed as bold and adventurous, Taylor was considered thoughtful and composed. For years, the two men navigated the same Hollywood circles, occasionally crossing paths, but never stepping on each other's toes. That's why Taylor's public condemnation of Gable came as such a shock. In an era where studio-controlled publicity polished every word and gesture, actors rarely aired personal grievances in public. For Robert Taylor to call Clark Gable a coward was not just an insult, it was a seismic shift that hinted at a story too explosive for Hollywood to ignore. The turning point between Robert Taylor and Clark Gable happened during one of the darkest chapters of American history, World War II. At a time when patriotism was at its peak and Hollywood's brightest stars were expected to contribute to the war effort, questions of courage and loyalty carried extraordinary weight. Clark Gable, despite his image as the daring Rhett Butler, faced controversy when the United States entered the war. Initially, he was reluctant to enlist. At 41 years old and already a wealthy, established star, Gable had much to lose by going to the front lines. Though his wife, Carole Lombard, was passionately devoted to the war effort, selling war bonds and urging Hollywood to rally behind the troops, Gable hesitated. Then tragedy struck. In January 1942, Carole Lombard was killed in a plane crash while returning from a war bond rally. Devastated, Gable eventually decided to enlist in the Army Air Forces. His decision was seen by many as a way to honor her memory. He trained as a gunner and was assigned to film recruitment and propaganda footage. Though he did fly a handful of dangerous missions over Europe, his service was carefully managed, ensuring that Hollywood's biggest star was rarely placed in direct peril. For Robert Taylor, who had also enlisted during the war, this struck a nerve. Unlike Gable, Taylor served actively as a flight instructor and took his duty seriously, training young men who would soon face the harsh realities of combat. Taylor admired bravery and integrity above all else, and to him, Gable's delayed enlistment and controlled assignments seemed hollow compared to the sacrifices of countless ordinary soldiers. The breaking point came during a heated conversation at a Hollywood gathering after the war. According to accounts whispered through industry circles, Taylor confronted Gable directly. In front of peers, he accused Gable of joining the war effort only after Lombard's death forced his hand and of avoiding the true dangers that others, less privileged and less famous, faced daily. Taylor's voice, usually calm, rose with emotion as he branded Gable a coward. The room reportedly fell silent. Few dared to intervene, for Taylor was not a man prone to outbursts. His words carried the sting of deep conviction, and the insult struck at the heart of Gable's identity. The man admired worldwide for his courage, and masculinity was, in Taylor's eyes, a man who had hidden behind his fame when it mattered most. For Gable, the accusation cut deep. He had indeed suffered. Losing Lombard had devastated him, but the notion that his military service was less than honorable was something he could never quite escape. To some of his fellow actors, Taylor's criticism seemed harsh, perhaps even unfair. After all, Gable had still risked his life flying missions over enemy territory. But to Taylor, who measured courage by willingness rather than appearances, the truth was undeniable. Gable's choices did not match his heroic image. The incident left a permanent scar on their relationship. Hollywood insiders continued to whisper about it, though the studios worked hard to downplay tensions between their stars. Still, the rift was never fully healed. Robert Taylor's blunt accusation revealed something that many had quietly suspected but never dared to say, that the glamorous heroes on screen were not always the fearless men they portrayed. In a world where appearances were everything, Taylor's outburst stripped away the illusion, forcing both men and those around them to confront the uncomfortable difference between Hollywood's carefully crafted myths and the messy reality of human fear and frailty. The aftermath of Robert Taylor's fiery outburst against Clark Gable rippled through Hollywood like a shockwave. The golden age of cinema was built on studio control, glamorous publicity, and carefully guarded reputations. Any public feud between two leading men of such stature threatened not only their personal legacies, but also the industry's polished image. Yet, within the inner circles of Hollywood, everyone knew that the bond between Taylor and Gable had been fractured, perhaps irreparably. For Taylor, the confrontation was not about jealousy or rivalry. He had long admired Gable's talent and charisma, and their careers rarely overlapped in competition. What unsettled Taylor was principle. He valued integrity, sacrifice, and quiet strength. To him, Gable's hesitation to enlist, followed by a carefully managed military career that still garnered public admiration, clashed with the image of heroism the studios and fans celebrated. In Taylor's eyes, there was hypocrisy in being praised for bravery when others, including men he had personally trained as a flight instructor, risked and lost their lives without fanfare. For Gable, the insult stung on multiple levels. He had already been battling grief over Carole Lombard's death, which had shattered his once buoyant spirit. Enlisting had been, at least partly, an attempt to honor her and prove himself worthy of her memory. Being called a coward, especially by a man as respected as Robert Taylor, only deepened his insecurities. Gable's public persona as the bold, unshakable king of Hollywood concealed a man who was, in truth, sensitive to criticism and wounded by personal loss. Their strained relationship became the subject of whispered conversations at studio dinners and private gatherings. MGM, the studio that had contracts with both men, worked to keep tensions out of the press. Any hint of animosity could tarnish the aura of glamour that audiences expected. Executives knew that fans preferred to believe their idols admired one another, just as they adored them. But within the industry, people began to take sides. Some sympathized with Taylor's perspective, quietly acknowledging that Gable's service, while real, was not the same as the sacrifices made by countless anonymous soldiers. Others felt Taylor had been too harsh, unfairly diminishing the significance of Gable's decision to enlist at all, especially given the risks he did face on bombing missions in Europe. The rift was never repaired. Though the two men occasionally crossed paths at industry events, their interactions remained cordial but cold. Gone was the camaraderie that might have existed between two of Hollywood's brightest leading men. In its place lingered a tension that reflected deeper questions about image, authenticity, and the cost of maintaining perfection under the public gaze. The incident also fueled a broader discussion within Hollywood about the gap between on-screen heroism and real-life responsibility. Fans adored Gable as Rhett Butler, a man of unshakable courage, but Taylor's condemnation reminded insiders that the man behind the role was mortal, conflicted, and at times reluctant. This contrast between illusion and reality exposed the fragile foundation of stardom during Hollywood's golden age. In the years that followed, Gable tried to move forward, continuing to act in successful films and maintaining his superstar status. Taylor, too, pursued a steady career, known for his reliability and dignity both on and off screen. Yet for those who remembered the confrontation, the divide between them symbolized something larger, the dangerous intersection of personal integrity, public expectation, and the crushing weight of myth-making, in an era where image often mattered more than truth. What lingered most was not simply the insult itself, but the undeniable humanity it revealed. Behind the glamour, the tuxedos, and the silver screen charisma, these men grappled with the same frailties, insecurities, and moral dilemmas as anyone else. And in one heated moment, Robert Taylor stripped away the veil, exposing Clark Gable not as a king, but as a man. As time passed, both Robert Taylor and Clark Gable remained fixtures of Hollywood's golden age, but their feud never fully faded from memory among those who knew the truth. For fans, the rift was invisible. Studios worked tirelessly to keep such controversies hidden, ensuring audiences continued to see their favorite stars as flawless icons. But for insiders, Taylor's accusation of cowardice lingered, serving as a reminder of the gap between public illusion and private reality. Clark Gable's career continued to soar in the post-war years, though he never entirely escaped the shadow of Carole Lombard's tragic death. Films like The Hucksters and Mogambo reinforced his enduring appeal, but colleagues noted a certain heaviness in his demeanor. He was still charming, still commanding on screen, but the vibrancy of his pre-war persona seemed diminished. For many, the King of Hollywood remained untouchable. Yet among peers, whispers of Taylor's sharp rebuke sometimes resurfaced, tarnishing the heroic image Gable worked to uphold. Robert Taylor, on the other hand, maintained a quieter but steady path. While perhaps not as celebrated as Gable, he earned respect for his professionalism, humility, and the seriousness with which he approached both his craft and his personal convictions. To those who admired him, Taylor's outburst was not an act of malice, but a rare moment of honesty in an industry built on facades. His reputation for integrity only deepened, even if his blunt words had alienated him from one of Hollywood's biggest stars. What makes this story so haunting is not the insult itself, but what it represents about fame. Both men, in their own ways, became trapped by the very images that made them legends. Gable was expected to embody courage at all times, a living Rhett Butler, larger than life and immune to weakness. Taylor was seen as the embodiment of dignity and restraint, a man who avoided scandal and confrontation. The day Taylor called Gable a coward, both of those illusions cracked. Gable's humanity was laid bare, and Taylor's temper, so rarely glimpsed, flared for all to see. In retrospect, the confrontation can be viewed with more nuance. Gable did, in fact, serve, flying dangerous missions that risked his life. His grief over Lombard's death was genuine, and his decision to enlist was motivated by pain as much as duty. Was he truly a coward? Perhaps not in the strictest sense. But Taylor's anger reflected the values of his generation. That courage meant stepping forward without hesitation, regardless of status, wealth, or fame. To him, Gable's delayed decision symbolized hesitation at a moment when bravery was most needed. Their story also exposes the fragile nature of Hollywood legacies. Fans often remember stars in black and white, heroes or villains, flawless or disgraced. The truth is far more complicated. Gable was both a beloved actor and a man haunted by loss, both courageous in moments and hesitant in others. Taylor was both dignified and principled, yet capable of words that cut deeply. Their legacies are not diminished by these contradictions. Rather, they are made more human. By the time Gable passed away in 1960 and Taylor in 1969, the feud had become more of a hushed anecdote than a public scandal. Yet its significance remains. It reminds us that even Hollywood's brightest stars lived under the same pressures, fears, and flaws as ordinary people. The glamour of the golden age may have been designed to hide those truths, but moments like this reveal the humanity behind the myth. Ultimately, the story of Robert Taylor and Clark Gable is not one of hatred, but of disillusionment. It is about the weight of expectation, the burden of living up to an image, and the heartbreaking realization that even kings can falter. And perhaps that is the real legacy. Not that one man called another a coward, but that both showed us the cost of pretending to be more than human.